Welcome to the Dairy Farmers Digest, a podcast dedicated to all things dairy farming. Each episode, we will talk to industry leaders who share their insights and experiences into the dairy business. I'm your host, Keith Schweitzer, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the DFD. I'm your host, Keith Schweitzer. I'm super excited to have Dr. Claira Seeley from University of New Hampshire on this morning. I know it's been a hot minute since I've been on, but welcome, Dr. Seeley. How are you this morning? How are things in New Hampshire?
Thank you. They're good. It's a little warm, unseasonably warm, but we're looking for a frost at the end of the week. So finally we'll get some more fall weather, which will be nice.
I'm excited for the first frost of the year, or I guess first frost of the fall, just to get things going and get the leaves changing and all that other stuff that comes with it. So I know most of our producers here in Ontario are pretty much wrapped up on corn silage. How are things?
They're progressing. They're still chopping corn. I know several farms that I work with, they're in the middle of cropping right now. So it's chugging along. I guess the dry weather has been sort of nice in that regard. We've gotten very little rain up here. We're in the middle of a drought, so
Yeah, I was going to say, like, are you affected by kind of, it looks like there's kind of a drought through kind of the eastern Midwest and up through Ontario here. We've been a little bit droughty and then through New York and stuff. So,
yeah, we're in so much of a drought that we're in like a fire danger warning right now, actually. So no open burns outside. We've got rain last week for a few hours and hopefully again this Wednesday, but it's very, very dry.
have you seen any results from feed quality yet or yield
No, and
reports or?
I will say I am not a nutritionist. I appreciate the work that nutritionists do, but I am not the one privy to the cord silage reports. Those are my colleagues at UNH. I am the lone dairy health person there, and I turn to my friends for nutrition help. So
You just deal with what they put out there.
yeah, yeah.
I know I was doing a little bit of background on you, and I know you've done you did your PhD in hypocalcemia, and I thought it was really interesting because I know you looked at the different timing of subclinical hypocalcemia, and it actually inspired me a little bit to do some work with a farm. We've been battling a little bit with some repro and some ketosis issues, and then I listened to you on another podcast. I was like, "Wow, let's go down that route." And so we started testing some blood. I guess we would have started in July,
Mm.
maybe, and so we're just getting some building up some database right now with some blood calcium numbers, and it's really interesting. And I've been inputting them into dairy comp for the producer, and then I got looking at them a little bit, and um, the tech support from dairy comp had messed up, so I actually had to go into the cow card and put it in.
Mm.
And a lot of times I go back, I'll save them up for 2 weeks, and then I'll go back, and they have NEDAP tags on them, and it's kind of interesting. I'd have a low blood calcium, and then they'd have an illness flag on their cow card, and I was like, oh, there is something to this. So maybe talk to some of the producers about what your dissertation was in.
Yeah, for sure. So I largely looked at the epidemiology of subclinical hypocalcemia. So sort of population health behind blood calcium dynamics in early lactation, because up until, I don't know, 8 years ago, there was a mixed bag in terms of the outcomes we saw when we deemed a cow to have subclinical hypocalcemia. And that was often because we were collecting a blood sample within the first day of calving. And so at that point, that is when calcium generally reaches the lowest point. But when we looked at that, some of those cows that were subclinically hypocalcemic produced a lot of milk, some produced little milk, some had trouble getting pregnant, some got pregnant just fine. So it was just a smattering of results when we deemed cows subclinically hypocalcemic based on that sort of 0 to 24 hour postpartum time point. So looking back about five-ish or so years ago now, Dr. McCart at Cornell, she and one of her grad students started dichotomizing cows based on two time points. So they looked at 1 day and 4 days postpartum to diagnose subclinical hypocalcemia at a variety of different cut points that you don't need to worry about the stats behind that because that's what we sit in academia and worry about. But basically, the moral of that story was a drop in blood calcium at 1 day is fine as long as she recovers that calcium by 3 or 4 days in milk. what we found consistently through my PhD work was that when cows either had reductions in blood calcium at 4 days or had persistent subclinical hypocalcemia through 4 days, that's when they went on to produce significantly less milk. They ate less feed, they got pregnant less successfully, they experienced additional health disorders, the litany of badness, as we like to say it. So
Yeah.
that was the culmination of a big chunk of my PhD was sort of figuring out those dynamics of blood calcium, what put cows at risk for those dynamics, and then later, how could we try and target those cows that are going to have what we call dyscalcemia now, so that low blood calcium at 4 days in milk. How can we better treat those cows? Could we delay giving a calcium bolus to 2 or 3 days? What can we do there to optimize those cows' outcomes? So that was largely what I focused my PhD work on.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting when I heard that because it just kind of made like a light bulb go off in my head. I was like, okay, like there is something to the timing. Maybe at day zero, there's a lot of metabolic changes going on in that cow. So the subclinical side of it isn't as important as maybe when those cows are really starting to ramp up their negative energy balance. So they're not eating enough, they're not getting pulling in
Mhm.
dietary calcium and we were seeing some weird results because on paper everything looked like it was okay, production was good, components were good. It was just we were struggling with repro, and so we ended up going down that avenue.
Oh, and was it successful? Or, I mean, did you sort
We
of
don't
figure
know
out a
yet.
problem? Oh,
We
okay.
don't know yet. So it's kind of it was interesting because some of the earlier results that I was getting from July and August and even early September were sitting around, I wouldn't say below 2, but below 2.2.
Hmm.
And there was some in, 1.9, 1.8 and things like that. Like the ones that were really low, like there
Yeah.
was definitely a problem, but we're just kind of in the early stage of this trying to get figured out what kind of data points that we're looking at so far. So,
Interesting. Yeah, and I will say one of the cool studies that we did back to that sort of negative energy balance aspect of it, we had a group of cows that this was a retrospective study, so it was a bunch of data that we were given from some other labs to look at. We had blood calcium. We also had individual intakes because they were in a tie stall. And we dichotomized our cows into those four different groups based on blood calcium at 1 and 4 days, and then also looked at dry matter intake between the four groups. And we found that the cows that had low blood calcium at 4 days, their intake looked very similar to their dynamics of blood calcium. So if they had a drop in calcium at about 1 day, but were back up and running by 4 days, intake looked really similar. And then our cows that were either persistently low or dropped at 4 days in blood calcium, their intake, you could have swapped out the two graphs and they looked pretty much exactly the same. So doesn't really answer the question, is it intake driving low calcium? Is it low calcium driving intake? It's probably a combination of both and then sprinkle some inflammation in there as well. But that was really telling to us that, there is something going on here. And to your point, that drop in blood calcium at 4 days is probably the cow just ramping up for high levels of milk production. That's our working hypothesis now that, like, a little bit of ketosis is also indicative of she's just producing a lot of milk and she
mhm.
just can't eat enough. So I think it's similar when we look at blood calcium, like that drop, we need that to sort of kickstart the engines so she can continue to produce a lot of milk.
Yeah, and I wonder, like myself, I wonder if we should stop calling it negative energy balance and call it negative nutrient balance.
Yes, or an energy deficit. We've gotten into many debates about this where like you can't have a negative balance, right? Balance means
No.
you're balanced. So I try, especially with my students, to use energy deficit or like nutrient deficit because that's what
Hmm.
it is, right? Like they
Yeah.
just are not consuming enough for how much they're exporting. So,
Yeah, and that ramp up is like some of the genetics on these cows now is like some of that ramp up is super, super steep. Like
mhm.
some of these older cows are just taking off and producing tremendous amounts of fat, protein, lactose,
Yeah.
milk, and like they just can't eat enough to support that nutrient requirement.
No, it's insane. I mean, we'll see cows within the first several days making 80, 90 pounds of milk, and that's
Yeah.
insane. Great for the cow, but if only we had the magic bullet of how could we give you enough to support that?
And it's kind of funny to look at too, because it's like, why can one cow support this, but another one can't?
Exactly. And that's one thing that we are trying to figure out. We did look at some hormones. There's a lot of hormones that are related to calcium homeostasis, and we hypothesized that perhaps that had something to do with it. It has a little bit to do with it. Someone needs to do some very intense studies and take some tissue biopsies and do all sorts of fancy lab work to really get to the bottom of it. I'm sure there's also a genetic component, and actually, on most of the cows that went into my PhD work, we do have genetics or are working on that. That's an ongoing project. We took hair samples. So hopefully, we can try and flush some of that out because I believe there is a genetic component as well.
Can you look at like a forage base, like different forages perform different in this, or is it like because it would have been kind of a typical northeastern,
Hmm.
midwestern diet, corn silage, haylage, that
Yep.
kind of thing?
Yeah, and I will say all of the cows that we looked at, just because we were working with some, higher producing, very intensely managed dairies in New York for these projects at large, they were all feeding negative DCADs. So for some of the studies, we did go out and take urine pHs on the dry cows just to make sure things were where we wanted. So I would be interested to see in other dietary strategies how these dynamics would translate, because, DCAD you will expect a little bit of a drop because we're just priming her homeostatic mechanisms for calcium. Um, so perhaps in different systems with different diets, it would perform differently.
Was there a difference in like a partial decad versus a full decad,
They were
or
all
did
pretty much a full DCAD.
okay.
When we were taking urine pHs, it was six-ish or so on average. There's the variation, but that was about what we were targeting, or what the
Can,
nutritionist was targeting and we were seeing.
yeah, like I know people have kind of played around with the partial decad. I'm not for that. I'm like, we might as well go all the way with it and
Yeah.
don't do it kind of half-heartedly. So, is there, I guess, with the calcium metabolism ability, I guess, in the early lactation, like, can you go too low in room or too low in urine pH when you're using these decad products?
You certainly would risk like going into acidosis with a cow. So like, we say six-ish or so in terms of DCAD. And now like, the folks that sell DCAD would be able to tell you this better. But at least from everything I know and have talked about with folks, six is where we want to land-ish. You'll get the good results of maintaining calcium postpartum, but you're not hedging on that like 5.5 range where you will acidify the cow and you will see negative ramifications in terms of health just because she's so acidified, she's not going to feel good, so she's not going to eat. And we already know that to an extent, negative DCAD will, drop that prepartum dry matter intake at least a little bit, depending on the product you're feeding. But if you drop that cow so low, then you're going to see negative repercussions because of that.
Will a cow go below 5.5?
I would guess they would. I don't know how long they could sustain that.
Okay.
So I think
Well,
you could. You probably have to do it in like a research setting. I think you'd have to work really hard, like in a, commercial farm to get a cow below that by just like feeding a decad or a negative decad ration. Um, because I think she would realize that things aren't going the direction that I want them to go, and I'm just not going to eat. And then you'd have other issues because she's not eating.
I know because I've never checked below 5.5 because that's as low as the pH strips go. But
Yeah. Yeah, I will say
I
we
mean,
use
you could
these.
get like the 3.5 to 5.5s, but
Yeah, and we use like an
yeah.
electric probe for our pHing that
Okay,
will
so
go
you're
as
yeah,
low.
you're
And
not just
yeah, you never see anything below 6, 5.7-ish or so.
to kind of circle back on like some practical things. Like, are you seeing like a trend in the industry where people are maybe using a bolus strategy a little bit different? Like, I know years ago it used to be like every third plus lactation cow gets 2 bottles of calcium and blah, do this and do that. And I think that's really kind of changed a lot and people have gone more down the bolus route. And I just didn't know if you're seeing, people delay that maybe second bolus to day two or day three to kind of help them through that slump.
Yeah, that's a great question. And like you said, back in the day, it was she cows in, we're gonna give her a bottle of calcium, and we found out that that is actually doing more harm than good because you're giving this cow so much calcium that is readily available in blood, and she thinks she's fine, and then that blood, their calcium from the bottle goes away within 12 hours, and she's worse off than she would have been had you not given her the bottle. So whenever we talk about bolusing and prophylactic strategies, we always preface it with please do not give bottles to cows that are not clinically hypocalcemic. So that's great that people are moving away from that. In terms of bolusing, I think producers often want to have like a solution, like she calved and you want to do something for her. So
Hmm.
more often than not, I'll see, a multiparous cow calves in, we give her a bolus. And like whether or not we think she has subclinical hypocalcemia, which again, if you look at all the research, a mixed bag in terms of is that bolus going to help every cow, or is it just kind of like you're shoving a few dollars down her throat? That's kind of what I will equate it to. Um, so we did do a project where we tried to delay bolusing to 2 and 3 days in hopes of targeting those cows with what we're calling dyscalcemia, so low calcium at 4 days in milk. Again, sort of a mixed bag. We saw improved milk production in our third parity cows, but not our second or our fourth and greater, which we're not really sure why that happened.
That's
Um,
so odd.
and
To
it's so interesting because we did that project on four very large farms and four very differently managed farms. And the same result came through on every single farm. So when we looked at, farm A, B, C, and D individually, all the third lactation cows that received that delayed bolus treatment made more milk. And we have no idea why. Maybe it was just the right amount of calcium that those cows metabolically needed for their just stage of life, not even production. I have no idea. Um, so with that said, we still don't really know when is the best time to give that bolus, and if we could figure out exactly which cows to give boluses to, I think that would save everybody a lot of time and money and stress on the cow instead of giving everybody a bolus. If we can use, rumination monitors or what have you to identify our cows that are at risk of having low calcium at 4 days, then target treat those cows individually.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, like, is there any way that we can adapt, say, rumination collars or anything like that to like find data points that would point that way?
Yeah, so that's what my research now is focused on. So we're working on exactly that, figuring out are there specific patterns in rumination that are indicative of risk of low blood calcium at 4 days? We did a project back when I was at Cornell where we looked at about 200-ish cows, so not a ton of animals, but we did look at blood calcium dynamics and rumination time. And our cows that were dyscalcemic had significantly lower rumination time, particularly in terms of how much they increased or decreased in rumination. So our cows with good blood calcium, they shot up like this. Rumination just took right off. Whereas our dyscalcemic cows, between 0 and 2 days in milk, rumination held pretty steady. So that's where I'm, focusing my work now is in those first few days, can we look at the hourly changes in rumination to identify cows that, hey, we should go give this cow a bolus. She might need X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, like that's really interesting to me. Like with some of this data analysis and the new collars coming out, like the technology has changed so much in the last 3 to 5 years that
Hmm.
it's like the, we're almost at an information overload now where we can get so much feedback from some of these diagnostic programs.
Yep, we get so much data from them that like we underutilize the data, and that's actually the goal of my research program now to sort of marry technology and biology. So we have all of this data from these cows, especially if you put like a SMAX Tech bolus in her, then you're getting body temperature, how much water she's drinking every day. It's a huge amount of data. And if we're just going to use that for repro purposes, it's incredibly underutilized. So there's got to be a way we can target that early lactation period. So
Well, I think from an industry standpoint, the repro is the easy sell,
yeah.
right? Because there's real dollars and
Oh yeah.
cents, but everything to that reproductive event is there's a precursor of a
Hmm.
transition event that happens.
Yep.
So how do we make these work a little bit more in conjunction that we can better predict the outcome on the repro side?
Yeah, and if we've already invested in these technologies, like if you have a farm that already has them, you're already getting the data, so you might as well utilize more of that data too, is my, line of thinking there, right?
Yeah, and I know like some of I'm not sure if issues is the right word, but some of the opportunities I guess that I see coming down the pipe is there's lots of this information coming out of the farms now. How do we utilize or how do we identify what's actually important that we
Hmm.
can implement on farm? Because like just myself working with a bunch of different producers, I probably look at in the course of a month, I bet you I look at 15 to 20 different technologies on farm, whether it be rumination, feeding software, dairy comp, parlor
Hmm.
information. Like there's just a plethora of stuff coming at us. We're drinking out of a fire hose as
Yeah.
farm advisors sometimes. And it's like, okay, let's try and get the blinders on in here, really nail down what's important.
Yeah, yeah, for
So,
sure. So much stuff to think about and not really a good direction of what is most important. And I think for every question, what is most important is going to be different. So,
but this calcium thing, like it's kind of interesting because our lactation service provider up here, like Lactanet or like DHI,
mhm.
is coming out with a transition index, and they were actually using one of my farms as one of the pilot projects.
Oh, cool.
And so I got to look at the index on it, and it was kind of funny because milk fever, and
Hmm.
I'm thinking it was clinical milk fever, had the lowest financial impact on farms.
Hmm.
Like it was like if you treat it, you're out a little bit of money on a lactation, but not a whole lot.
Yeah, yeah.
But then we get into the subclinical stuff, that I think is a lot more fascinating because it's easy for a farmer to see a clinical
Yeah.
cow because you give her calcium and she gets
Hmm.
up and then she keeps going. With the subclinical, like we just don't know what's going on in
Nope.
the background, right? Like,
Yeah, and the negative repercussions that are going to keep coming down the line. So back to
mhm.
repro, how much milk is she going to produce? Is she going to get cold at 60 days? So yeah, it's there's a lot that goes behind that that we don't see until, we calculate how much money she made us that lactation or what have you. So,
It's like a farmer's financial books. You don't look at it till the end of the year
mhm.
when a lot of the
Yeah.
stuff is happening in like real time that needs to be managed or manipulated so that you could have a better outcome at the end of the year, right? Like it's just, I think there's a huge opportunity, especially on some of these subclinical things that, you know, little changes here and there can make a pretty large impact on
Hmm.
a producer's bottom line, right? So
Yeah, for sure.
what are some of the long-term effects, I guess, other than maybe, delayed calving on hypocalcemia or subclinical hypocalcemia?
Yeah, so just like associations with the disorder, I guess, like throughout
Yeah,
lactation. Yeah, so
yeah.
repro is a big one. Um, you know, Delayed time to pregnancy, increased inseminations for a successful pregnancy, as well as reduced milk production. So those cows that have lower blood calcium at 4 days in milk, they do go on to produce significantly less milk. Most of the stuff we've looked at is through about 150 days or so. So throughout their lactation, they're producing significantly less milk. So the big, take homes are less milk, lower repro, and that's, what is ultimately going to make you money in the end. Um, there is some evidence for increased health risk for other diseases and disorders like DA, ketosis, metritis, as well as culling. Our sample sizes are not large enough yet to see huge differences in terms of culling and disease events. We have quite a few cows on all the studies we've looked at, but as epidemiologists, we need lots and lots of cows to really say that with confidence. But certainly hedging in that direction of other just bad health things occurring. So,
So with these studies, like you're doing them on commercial dairies, like this
yep.
isn't in a research setting at a
Yeah, no, we do.
UNH's farm.
No, no, no. We do them on commercial farms for a few reasons. One, external validity, right? Our research farms operate in their little bubble of research farms. And also, we need more animals than we often have at our research farms.
Have you looked at like colostrum production in like postpartum, like hypocalcemia? Like, is there a connection there, do you think, or is that something that you haven't really gone down yet?
That is a great question, and you can talk to my advisor for my PhD, Dr. McCart, about that. They did a project right after I left where they, I believe, collected colostrum and looked at colostrum quality as well as quantity because, I mean, that's a huge question mark in the industry right now of like, why do some cows produce no colostrum and why do others produce some and difference in quality there? So I believe they looked at that and I don't know if they've analyzed the data yet. So you can talk to Dr. McCart about that one.
Yeah, because I started getting calls a couple weeks ago, so I was just kind of curious about that, and I think there's a big seasonal effect to it. But then I wondered,
Hmm.
like, is there something with calcium homeostasis or other hormones or different mineral interactions that are affecting that? And could that be a predictor? Like, She
Yeah.
didn't have a lot of colostrum. Okay, let's watch her for, you know,
Yeah, that's a really good thought. Or maybe he did produce a lot of colostrum. Perhaps that was a huge pull
the
on her
other thing
calcium.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine, we say the transition period is just the web of death of things, right? Energy deficit, inflammation, calcium, all the stuff. So like add colostrum into that web and you're set.
Yeah, well, there's a few things I tell farmers and they probably get sick of hearing me, but it's like anytime you use the word transition on a farm, that's a dirty, dirty word.
Yeah,
That's
there
where
is
your
a lot
problems are,
of
right? So
yeah, that is a good point. Many things come along with that word. So
I guess does the blood calcium change? Like how quickly or how rapidly does it change? Is it changing hourly? Is it changing daily? Is it
mm.
changing minute by minute? Like I don't know how in depth your study would have went, like your time frame on testing, but
Yeah, that's a really good question. And actually, we were curious about this. So, we know that BHB and fatty acids, they cycle diurnally in blood across the day, mostly relative to feeding time. So that's why, if we're out BHB testing, we want to test either right before feed delivery or right at feed delivery to make sure we're getting her absolute value of BHB, not like what is being produced in the rumen. And so we were curious about that for calcium because oftentimes we go out and sample blood calcium on commercial farms right after they've been fed. They come back from the parlor, so they lock up. But we were curious, does that have any influence on what we're reading in terms of blood calcium? And so we had a study that we actually took 24-hour blood draws on a bunch of early lactation cows every 2 hours. So we had multiple days of every 2 hour data, and we analyzed calcium on that no influence in terms of like diurnal cycling. So relative to milking, feeding, calcium didn't change. Um, so that's great, right? We don't have to worry about when we're calcium testing. In terms of how quickly it changes day to day, it depends on the cow. So that's the big problem. Ideally, we have that drop in blood calcium at 1 day, so she drops to 1.8-ish or so millimoles per liter. And then by 3 days, she's back up at like 2.12. And then by 4 days, she's back up above 2.2. So not astronomically steep increases, but an appreciable increase.
mhm.
Um, but some cows we'll see that are chugging along just fine at calving a few days after they're at, 2.1, and all of a sudden they plummet down to like 1.6. I don't know why that happened. Something metabolically shifted within her that she wasn't able to meet those calcium demands. So it can drop very, very quickly, but it can also come back up quickly. So we'll have those cows that have that quick drop, but then also a quick increase. So it's incredibly cow dependent.
That's the problem. We're dealing with a biological organism.
Yes. I like to say
Like
cows don't read the rule books. They don't know.
no.
And if they did, that would be great. But then I wouldn't have a job and probably neither would you. So,
Well, it's just like the ketosis conundrum because you could see cows that are testing 1.8 BHB on a blood test
mhm.
and they're rocking, they're
And they're
increasing,
fine.
they're eating, they're doing fine. And you get
Mhm.
another cow that is at 1.5 and look like she's gonna die.
Mhm. Yeah. Yep.
So I guess yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Yes, it does keep
problem.
us employed. I don't think AI can figure that one out. So
Which I
not
will
yet.
say to
Not
another
yet,
point.
anyways.
Yeah, right. Which I guess is good. It keeps things interesting. And I will say to that end too, we do get so hung up on cut points. Like for BHB, we have 1.2, that's subclinical ketosis, right? Calcium, same thing. We're still always circling the light on what is the cut point, how do we define it? And as we increase our knowledge on subclinical hypocalcemia and these blood calcium dynamics, I think we're still not sure exactly of that cut point. We have indicators, so like that 2.2 by 4 days in milk, that's usually a pretty safe mark of like if you're below that, then things are not doing great for you. As we move closer to that 1 day time, that's when things get really murky and you could set your cut point at 2 or 1.8 millimoles per liter, and it's very variable in terms of what your outcomes are. So that is one thing I do like to say, when I'm working with producers and doing my own research, in that like I do believe that cut points are almost herd specific, depending on the diet you're feeding, just the cows in that population. So that is one thing that I think we should keep in mind. And perhaps, 5 years from now, we'll have a better understanding of yes and no in terms of cut points. But we're still working on that, if that makes any sense.
So is that just like you just need a bigger data set just to collect the statistics to get a more defined
Yeah, I think
range?
so. I think so. I mean, and like I said, the 2.2 millimoles per liter at 4 days, most of our studies in terms of the epi that we've done behind that to identify that cut point land right about that area of the 2.2. But certain farms you look at, that cut point is too low, too high. Putting it into the broader context of things, I think it's pretty safe to say that that's a good, benchmark. Um, but if you're like out analyzing a specific herd and that 2.2 cut point is just not making sense, like if you have cows that are deemed subclinically hypocalcemic based on that 2.2 that seem fine, maybe it's worth lowering or raising that cut point. So that's just my disclaimer of we get very hung up on cut points, and I think sometimes we just need to think of the directionality of change in blood calcium over absolute values of blood calcium.
Well, I think as humans want to be so static on the numbers, then the cows are, nope, we're dynamic. We're all over the place. So
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really great way of putting it because we want to know like yes, no, this is it, but they're
we're
cows.
thinking
So,
linear X's and
hmm.
O's, ones and zeros, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
how much, I guess from like a DCAD strategy side, like is one program in your experience better than another? Because I know like there's different areas of that we as advisors look at. Like there's the cal or phosphorus binders, calcium binder X-lates, there's the DCADs, there's the no anything. Like is there
Yeah.
one that's maybe performing better than another that you see?
I think again, we need more data on that because most of the work we've done so far has been on decad fed herds, like negative decad herds. So that's sort of our comfort zone right now, especially because up until very recently, that's been the calcium strategy, right? Is feeding a
Hmm.
negative decad. And then the phos binders have come on the market and they've kind of mixed things up because they are arguably a bit easier to manage. Um, I think just based on what I know about the phosphorus binders and what I've seen in terms of some data, they really limit that drop in blood calcium at 1 day because they're binding phosphorus. They're also binding calcium. And just through the overlap of phosphorus and
And
calcium,
whatever else, like they don't really know and they won't,
yeah, all the
they
other
just don't
things that
know.
come along with it, right?
Yeah.
And the overlap of those homeostatic mechanisms really limit that drop in blood calcium. So if you look at, there was a study out of Cornell a few years back, and they looked at blood calcium feeding that zeolite A, and there was very little drop in blood calcium at 1 day, which is great if we're trying to limit that drop in blood calcium. But if we need that drop in blood calcium to really jumpstart our milk production, I'm wondering like what is going on in the next few days if we've limited that calcium
Well,
reduction.
I kind of wonder that as well too, because I think in that study, like X-late, the X-late A didn't
Hmm.
really have a milk increase, but the DCAT did.
Yeah.
So is there something metabolically going on that the DCAT's doing something else to help jumpstart
Yeah.
that extra milk production, right?
Yeah. I think that that has a lot to do with it. There's some when a cow is in ketosis, they also are like slightly acidified, ketoacidosis. And so if we're acidifying that cow through a negative DCAT, are we working in similar mechanisms to increase blood calcium as well as glucose precursors and things like that and allowing her to make more milk? So, because we do see those subset of cows that have that little bit of ketosis that produce more milk. So, are they working in a similar realm in terms of optimizing milk production? I don't know. And I don't think anyone's targeted or specifically looked at that yet. But I do think that there is a difference in calcium dynamics in the blood depending on the strategy that we're feeding our cows. How it pans out, I don't know because we haven't looked at it enough because the FOS binders have not been on the market long enough to do that.
Well, and I wonder too, just like complete metabolic outcomes too. Like if that cow
Hmm.
calves in, no RP, like gets up and gets going, is the calcium status going to be the same or different compared to a cow that maybe had an RP or had
Yeah.
like a clinical milk fever, right? Like,
Yeah,
but
for certain.
do any other, I guess, mineral interactions play a role in the calcium? Like I'm thinking like magnesium or phosphorus or potassium
Yeah, yeah.
specifically.
So they're all play a role in one another. Magnesium is needed in order for PTH, so parathyroid hormone, which is needed for maintaining calcium homeostasis. So in order for PTH receptors to work, you also need magnesium. So we want to make sure we're meeting those magnesium requirements for the cow, just so that way we're not limiting her ability to maintain calcium homeostasis because the receptors needed aren't working because we don't have enough magnesium. Phosphorus also plays a role. So there has been some increase back to our phos binders in low phos diets in that early lactation period because the homeostasis of phosphorus and calcium overlap a little bit. And so when you're mobilizing phosphorus from bone, calcium is also going to come out of bone. So if we have that low phos diet, just like, when we acidify a cow or whatnot, and we falsely decrease blood calcium, not falsely, but you know what I mean,
Yeah.
jumpstart those mechanisms. If we're pulling phos out, we're also going to pull calcium out. So there is some indication that the lower phos diets may also play a role in calcium homeostasis. Um, so those are the main players right there.
Well, I kind of wonder about the phosphorus thing all the time because there's lots of times, and I ask producers too, like if they're having a milk fever issue or like something flaring up on the farm, I'm like, are you giving them calcium? Yeah. Are they
Hmm.
responding? Well, no. Well, then is it really a calcium
Is it
issue
really
or is it a
calcium?
is it more of a phosphorus issue, right? So,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think. I mean, they play a role in one another quite. They're all interchanged.
yeah, and I just wonder, do we see maybe more phosphorus issues in the countryside, especially being with some of the byproducts and things that we're feeding at are typically high phos.
Yeah.
So is there more of an interaction there that's affecting blood calcium later on? Like I don't know these things. So,
Yeah.
but it's things I
I
think about.
Yeah, and I think it's worth thinking about because, we feed such specific tailored diets, but is just like that little bit more phosphorus going to do something we don't want it to do or didn't expect it to do just because of the way the cow works. So I think it's a good way to think about it.
Just to touch back on the calcium a little bit, like when you were looking at this study, was there a difference in calcium levels on the farm? Because I know that some producers will have diets that are maybe higher calcium, some will have lower calcium diets.
Yeah.
I seem to lean one way compared to another.
Yeah, and that's a great question. As you were saying that, to be honest, I don't remember what the dietary calcium was. My guess would be kind of middle of the road, just in terms of what we knew and know about feeding negative DCAD and calcium. I don't think we were pushing them super hard in terms of either a low calcium or a really high calcium diet. So my guess, without remembering specifically, would just be normal.
Yeah,
So
just right. Goldilocks. Yeah,
yeah, right. Like, so this is the non-nutritionist in me who's just like,
yeah.
well, someone did that, and I'm gonna trust that they knew what they were doing.
Out of that last study that you did your PhD in, like, what's the next steps in your mind, or like what kind of avenues are you looking down
Yeah.
to kind of further that knowledge?
Yeah, so now, like, as transition cow researchers and folks who are really interested in subclinical hypocalcemia, I think at large, we're all trying to figure out how inflammation plays a role in the etiology or the development of dyscalcemia. So there's been some work out so far that indicates cows that are dyscalcemic, though having that low calcium at 4 days, have increased inflammation. So is it inflammation causing low calcium causing the inflammation? So how does that fit in? And then how can we use that knowledge of inflammation and calcium to better treat cows? I think, we have a lot of tools in the toolbox in terms of boluses, bottles of calcium when we need them, but we're still trying to figure out where and when the best time to use those are to optimize where we're spending our money and how much production that cow is going to give us later on. So that's kind of a facet of it. I'm also really interested in seeing how we can use technologies to better inform us of subclinical disorders. So it's impractical for producers to go out and take blood calcium on every cow or ones they suspect because one, we don't have a cow side meter to measure calcium, and two, that is not a good use of our time all the time to be out blood sampling our fresh cows. So can we use rumination monitors, activity monitors to identify cows that are at increased risk so we can go out and targetedly look at certain cows to then better treat, better manage. Maybe she needs to stay in the maternity pen a few days longer, or if we have a special fresh pen. So that's really the avenue that my research is going down. How can we use technologies to better inform us of early lactation cow health, looking at targeted treatment strategies from there. So still a lot of question marks. We still don't fully understand the biology of dyscalcemia. Like I said, to the inflammation point, how does that fit in? We're still putting the pieces together.
A work in progress.
A work in progress, an interesting work in progress. And also back to your question about the dietary strategies. I mean, these are things I think about every day as well. We could focus on inflammation, we could focus on calcium boluses, we could focus on differences between prepartum dietary strategies. And I think they're all incredibly useful because they're things, producers have to deal with on a daily basis because information overload. We have so many options available to us. What are we going to choose, and then how are we going to manage from there? So
It's not just producers getting the information overload. I think it's industry and academia and everybody. Like there's endless possibilities of things that you could look at. And when you're
hmm
dealing with a biological being, you don't know half the interactions that are happening that we just don't have a clue about, right? So
Yeah, there's so much.
yeah, and then you throw the environment and everything else into it, and it's like, huh.
Yeah.
And throw a little heat stress at it, or
Yes.
limited water access or something, like you just
hmm
no, I think that was about all the questions I had. Was there anything else that you'd like to add? Maybe some tips or anecdotes for producers to kind of think about while they're doing their daily
Yeah.
routines?
I think we covered it. Don't give bottles of calcium to cows that don't need it. Some cows probably don't need a calcium bolus that we're giving boluses to. It's not gonna, kill her to give her a bolus, but there's definitely avenues and opportunities to just target use boluses. Um, and I guess stay tuned for more. We're learning more every single day. But I will say,
Yep.
if we are going to go blood sample cows and look at blood calcium, if you're going to do it one time during the early lactation period, do it at 4 days, not one day. That'll tell you a lot more information.
After I heard you on that podcast, I was like, oh, it really made like a light switch go off, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and you guys are continuing to do on this because I think it's the number one most important thing is maybe outside of calf nutrition is transition cow stuff, because
hmm
at the end of the day, the milk in the tank is what pays the bills. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think too, one thing is that I think genetics have changed so fast in the last few years that I think nutrition work is maybe a little bit behind the eight ball again. Maybe 5 years
Mm,
ago, I would have said nutrition works ahead of where the cow's genetics are. And I think
hmm
we've flip-flopped again where, I
Yeah,
think I think these cows I don't know what they're capable of.
a
There's
lot.
there's herd level producers doing 3.5 kilos of components, over 8 pounds of components for US numbers. And it's like, how do we get every herd doing this?
Yeah.
And, when I first started my career, I thought, 1.5 kilos of fat per cow, or that was a lot. I don't know if we'll ever hit that. Now we're looking at 2.1. So it's like things
hmm
really do change in a hurry. So
Yeah, they really do.
anyways, thanks for your time this morning, Clara. And I really appreciate it. And all the best here coming into the
Thank you. You
fall
too.
season with you guys.
Yeah, thank you. It was great to talk with you.
Thanks for listening. This episode of the Dairy Farmers Digest is brought to you by the dairy team at Wallenstein Feed and Supply Limited. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast player, and please leave us a review. If you would like further information about today's topic, check out the show notes for further details and our contact information. I would also like to extend a special thanks to Christine Schoonerwood, our producer, and our sound engineer, Daniel Noguera.